Okay, so when I start thinking about the best way for a digital marketer to kind of disrupt, stand out, and differentiate themselves, from everyone else, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Yeah. Well, I think like it all starts from understanding what is your niche, where exactly are you trying to position yourself. So I think we're in a very crowded market nowadays for sure, but it's really good to always like focus on your maybe expert area. So where are your strengths exactly? So maybe it's a specific industry, maybe it's a specific location, maybe it's the size of the company. It could be some specific maybe services or benefits that your customers would get by working with you. So there could be many different things actually. So I think just trying to focus, and then once you have lots of great case studies, lots of great referrals, and you see that growth happening, then you can scale further and grow from there.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, I'm excited to talk about the subject that we're going to talk about today and give you an opportunity to meet Maryna Burushkina. So Maryna, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's exciting to be here today with you.
Yeah, and we've tried to meet a couple times and some things have come up, but I definitely wanted to make sure that we had this interview because we're going to talk about something that, quite frankly, when you start looking at small, businesses, even individuals, they struggle with something that they have to get right today, and that is to putting together, the strategies that are necessary to be successful, do the proper planning on the front end, know how to take the right step. And oftentimes we just get misled. So that's why I think what you're going to talk about today is really important. So to get lost with that, and after this, we'll ask a little bit about your background is, if you could answer to me or help me answer, what question do B2B digital marketers need to be asking themselves today?
Yeah, that's a great question to start with. I think actually there are maybe a few questions, but my favorite one would be, let's try to understand the customer journey from step one, when they first maybe hear or see a brand, until they convert, and then when they interact with the brand, right? And when they're ready to tell all their friends about it. So I just love to talk about the customer journey because I feel like a lot of times what happens with us marketers is just we jump into tactics, right? Let's do, I don't know, PPC ads, let's do the email campaign, let's optimize this area or that area, but we really forget oftentimes about the actual funnel and where everything fits and making sure that we bring that customer through the journey.
Yeah, and to me, just kind of peel it back a little bit and get a little bit more specific. You're really talking about connecting with them in a very, emotional and human way, instead of it being a tactical, functional way. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it can be also connected in a tactical way sometimes, like through the ads or like landing pages, whatever. But what I really mean is that we need to think about what was the previous interaction they might have had with the brand, or like, what do we want them to take on the next step in their journey with our company? And especially for B2B, it becomes a little bit more complex than for B2C, right? Because we have multiple stakeholders involved in the play, and the sales process might take longer, especially if you're talking enterprise sales. So for us, it's even more complex than for B2C. And thinking about the customer journey is really helpful in the spectrum, just to make sure you also increase your results at the end of the day.
Yeah, and let's be quite clear. When you start looking at all the statistics associated with how B2B, and how organizations decide, that there's more people in that decision than there have ever been before. That's one issue. And now also those people are dispersed. So they're not all in one place being able to meet. So it's important. Okay, so before we get into that, if you could tell the B2B DM gang a little bit about you, your background, and what you're doing today that is going to help us.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in digital marketing. I've been doing that for over 15 years. And also for over a decade, I had my own agency who was focusing majorly on fintech marketing, which I also sold actually a few months ago. And from last year, I also started my own startup focusing on technology and helping companies automate their marketing planning to really save time, costs, and jump faster into the executional part, our favorite, right? And really cut down the part that takes us so much time into really identifying, okay, what I should focus on, what should be the key results, what's the research, what's the competitors, so all that kind of part that comes before we actually can do something, right?
Well, and I think an important point in what you just said is to know that what we often have relied upon in order to decide, which is our intuition, our gut, must be questioned now. Because we're not doing business the way that we had done it in the past. And arguably, when we see some additional changes that are happening in regards to maybe Italy doesn't go into its fourth lockdown, and those types of things, and it doesn't matter where we are in the world, quite frankly, is that it's going to be even a different landscape then. What is it going to exactly look like? We really don't know. So being able to always question our gut and do it in a very effective and efficient manner is going to be the difference between success and failure. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. And with actually automating that part, it's not only our kind of personal bias in place, right? But it also makes it marketing planning more dynamic. Like if you would have made your marketing plan for a year, like in January last year, you could have thrown it down to the trash in March, right? When COVID hit. When you actually use real-time data, you can refresh, update it in real time, and then really see, okay, what's actually relevant today. So then it's no longer that static presentation or whatever you have there sitting in your SlideShare or Dropbox, but it's actually this living either document or a dashboard that you have in place, right? Like with us, that you can always rely to and go back to and refresh at any point of time to see, okay, is my actual strategy still valid? Or is there something else that I need to consider for the next period of time? So I think those are some of the top things to really think about when it comes to marketing planning today.
And earlier when I first started, having this conversation with you, I kind of planted, a seed, so to speak, in regards to research, that is currently out there in regards to organizations and the development, of their marketing plans and, content marketing strategies and those types of things. And the fact is that for most organizations, they either don't have one or they have a very ineffective one. And if you put those two things together, that's like more than 80% of all organizations. It's a massive number. So if you can, before you go into it, talk about what organizations struggle with and what yet they need to do. So if you think about that from I have a problem to solve for, right? This is what I'm doing, and this is what I need to do. And not even thinking about it from a tech perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are lots of challenges nowadays, right? I think one of the things that we see happen right now is that organizations, like bigger organizations, medium-sized organizations, tend to spend too much time brainstorming, workshops, going back and forth. I mean, it's great to have those creative moments, but it cannot take forever. I mean, some organizations take months, over months, and sometimes half a year to just like plan like a marketing strategy or like a brand strategy campaign even. And it just shouldn't take that long, right? You should be able to identify those opportunities, research the market, and go to the next step. And until you go to the next step, usually in our kind of normal everyday scenario, only then you would be able to test different strategies and see what works and what doesn't, right? So I think those are some of the things. And that brings me to the next challenge, which I think is also very valid, is that some people just launch and go with it and really miss the part of experimenting, looking into new opportunities. I think experimentation needs to happen. It's like an ongoing process, right? Test, learn, apply, repeat. right? It's always happening. It has to be always happening because there's always a better copy, always a better headline. There might be a better, I don't know, placement, better layout option for a specific call to action. There might be different, I don't know, content opportunities. So you have to always keep on testing, and on this way you will be able to identify what are those exact opportunities and how we can improve our conversions or whatever else is your actual objective, right? So I think that's really important. It's also something that we always consider also within our tool at Growth Channel. So we also do partially like simulation before we actually release the full marketing plan, before you see, okay, 75% success rate, great, I'm ready to go. So it actually does the simulation also for a few days, so that like escalated process in terms of instead of waiting a few months and test it all manually, it also does with us actually in real time within the tool itself.
Okay, so that seems very compelling. So I think, you talked about fintech. You talked about, a couple different things from a tech perspective. Yeah, I think, artificial intelligence is kind of for many, oh gosh, the gray matter in regards to technology, because we hear this artificial intelligence. And the fact is when you are to get under the hood or bonnet, depending on where you're listening or watching, is, you may see that there's really not a whole lot of AI that's there. It's maybe some business rules that exist. Things are being pulled from certain places depending on how you're requesting and selecting, and it's it's pretty well. It's just not very dynamic, but yet it's being pushed and being delivered and promoted as artificial intelligence. So if you can kind of clarify what we're talking about when we use artificial intelligence in this type of context. What is it really doing?
Yeah, so I think today actually there are a few tools that are doing a pretty good job in terms of applying AI and machine learning into marketing, but mostly that piece comes into like activating those campaigns. There are a few that also help you with optimizing the campaigns, and even I think a few reporting ones as well that actually tell you like predictive analytics, right, as a part of it, that tell you, hey, this is the kind of the prediction of how much you could get if you continue on this path based on the other historical data that you have. So there are actually a few tools out there in the market that you can use to really improve your activation campaigns. There are also a whole bunch of like different opportunities nowadays in terms of like creating actual content with AI, either media content or written content, optimizing some of the campaigns based on the keyword groups, and bidding opportunities like budget allocation I have seen as well, and that's predictive analytics. So I think my favorite areas. Within sales, there are a whole bunch of AI I see applied as well. You can see actually one of them almost every day when you purchase something, because there's this the price adjustment, right? There are some tools that adjust the pricing with AI based on so many different metrics. There are tools within CRM as well that help with lead scoring, like automated lead scoring, lead segmentation, that can also help like your sales colleagues with identifying those leads. Within Growth Channel, we use that for simulation purposes, so simulating those A/B tests. And also we use the copywriting to actually generate the report. So then you don't need to, let's say, if you're an agency or if you're a B2B marketer, then basically you don't need to write what or understand what is exactly the data presented to me mean. So our tool actually writes that for you so that you don't have to think too much or too hard about it, basically. So that's just a few applications, like which one my favorite ones, but there are endless nowadays. I think there are so many great things happening with AI today and machine learning as well. So I would just say, like, if you're interested in the topic, just go Google it and see some other cool stuff happening.
Well, and even when I think about that, though, and you started mentioning some of those things, I started thinking about larger organizations. And so for us, a lot of the folks that are part of the B2B DM gang, I mean, we're coaches, consultants, small businesses. And when you look at a lot of the marketing departments that are in those types of organizations, there's, 2 people and they're splitting duties. They're doing all this. And when you started mentioning about some of these activities that I need to do, I'm like, oh my gosh, do I even have the resources to do all that? Right. Maybe it's just me, and can I even, do these things? Is it realistic? But then I also start thinking of, well, I've got to do better than everyone else. So I kind of need it. So it's kind of a catch-22, as they say. I'm in trouble if I do, and I'm in trouble if I don't. Or is that not true?
Yeah, I mean, some of the AI tools there have like startup and SMB packages. So then you can actually get started either for free or at the very low kind of level. Some of them are actually designed for startups and SMBs and kind of smaller consultants. For example, the one that I mentioned that actually creates images for you, right, for your ads. So then you don't need to have the necessarily like a full-time designer. And if you're running PPC ads, especially with like banners and all that stuff, so that you can really optimize on the go, some of them are really inexpensive. And even like think back, I don't know, I think it was 5 years ago or maybe even more. Remember there was this virtual assistant release, like AI virtual assistant that would help you reply to some of your emails and book your meetings if you connect to your Google Calendar. Like even that simple example, and I think they also had like $5 a month or something for a virtual assistant, which you would otherwise pay like $5 probably an hour instead of per month, right? For a virtual assistant otherwise. So, I mean, those are just a few examples.
Okay, so when I start thinking about, the best way for a digital marketer to kind of disrupt, stand out, and differentiate themselves, from everyone else, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, well, I think like it all starts from understanding what is your niche, where exactly are you trying to position yourself. So I think we're in a very crowded market nowadays for sure, but it's really good to always like focus on your maybe expert area. So where are your strengths exactly? So maybe it's a specific industry, maybe it's a specific location, maybe it's the size of the company. It could be some specific maybe services or benefits that your customers would get by working with you. So there could be many different things actually. So I think just trying to focus. And then once you have lots of great case studies, lots of great referrals, and you see that growth happening, then you can scale further and grow from there.
Okay, so now you talked about a little bit about your background, saying that you were, owned an agency. You've also lived in several different places around the world, right? If I start thinking about essentially globalization, more and more of us now can sell any product and service, halfway around the world quite easily. And you're also talking about making sure that you're connecting with your customer and your ideal client. I mean, so with your background and experience and all these different cultures and types of customers and ideal customers that you have seen, what are some of the things that are really common across all that will allow me to be successful?
Well, I think everyone today can jump on a Zoom call for sure. So that is one. But yeah, I think also because of the COVID, I think now it's easier than ever, most probably, to connect with another side of the world and have that conversation, maybe even convert them as a customer much faster as well, because everything is digital nowadays. So you can just do that maybe by email and jump on a few virtual calls instead of actually have to travel somewhere, see someone in person and shake their hand. So I think this is really an opportunity and can be taken as well, I think, for everyone nowadays. So that's definitely something to consider if you haven't considered yet. But every culture is also very different. So if you're, I don't know, in the US and you want to target Japan, so definitely like maybe check some of the differences. I think like the sales cycle might be longer, things that the communication is most probably very different, less direct. And there are so many different cultural differences out there. So definitely something to consider whenever you do business internationally.
Well, and if you think about that from your testing, for example, you talked about that. I need to put together a plan that's going to enable me or allow me to be the most successful, for my marketing strategy. I mean, if I'm thinking about that from a connection, right? I want to be able to connect and convert the best that I possibly can. It is in that particular example or scenario, is there some commonalities that we need to be hitting on? Because I find people all the time will say, well, this is going to work because it's connecting to this, type of emotion or whatever. And then they find out that, well, it does here, doesn't here. And that's what I'm like, if we have something that could be accessed from anywhere, do you see some commonalities that are telling us really, this is kind of a good base to start with.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea to start from the basics. But if you have the opportunity, then definitely localize. Like if you're going international, definitely localize like your messaging, the visuals, even sometimes colors matter. Like if you're talking, you gave the Asian example, so like their colors really matter a lot. But like copy is different. In Europe, for example, security is playing a very, very important element. So you definitely want to mention that on your landing page much more than if you would mention it in the US, for example. I think in the US also the copy is much more maybe straightforward, more kind of creative, kind of trying more salesy, maybe even type of copy. And in Europe, it's a little bit more maybe traditional in a way as well. It's still creative, but definitely like security plays an important element, people, and it's very different direction that you would take. It's also maybe more a little bit more conservative than here. So but also every country within Europe is also different. So you cannot really also generalize everyone in one bucket. And also sometimes different countries have their like legal limitations. So sometimes like you cannot just call someone without having their consent, for example, in Germany. So like lots of different things to consider. So definitely like do very quick research, maybe like 3 minutes research just to check in on what are the basics that you need to know if you're going for a specific market that's international, if you're not familiar with it before.
Okay, so then for me, when I started looking at being able to be more effective at this, and you and I have kind of talked about this, so we're taking all these things that we need to do, and there could be, I don't even want to get into the whole scale issue because that could be quite significant. But what are some of the things that we can easily automate in order for us to be able to remove some of this burden so that we can have a greater first step and then therefore go down a path of, let's just say, velocity a lot faster?
Yeah. So I would just kind of take a step back and really think about, okay, who is your customer? And from that, really to identify, okay, what are they trying to achieve, what their goals are. You can actually use that from maybe when you speak to the actual customers and just ask them, what's your objective? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And it's always good to record it, like make a note, or if you have a recording, record it. And you can also use that like as a quote on your landing page, because if a customer said it, it's likely that another customer has it in mind too. And it's much more powerful than if you would turn it into your own words. So that's one. And then identify what are their challenges, like what are their pain points? What are they trying to solve? Use that on your landing page too. And again, if a customer tells you that, note it down and put that on your landing page. Again, customer voice is much more powerful than you putting it into your own words, because the way you would describe it might be very different than the way they would describe it. And then things like identifying who and what influences their decision, because that would basically mean, okay, where shall I be present on to make sure that their decision is impacted when I need to convert them into a sale. Things like what they like, what they don't like, also stuff you can put on your landing page, basically. And what are their KPIs? Again, stuff you can put on your landing page, right? Identifying what are the important channels for them. And again, you can ask them what maybe publications do you read, or you can do that as a part of your kind of onboarding call or like discovery call even when you jump on a call with a customer potential one. And then, of course, our tool automates that, but those are different buckets that even you, without having all the resources, you can do that also manually if you don't have the budget, or if you're like a one-person company and so on. So I think all of that is very doable, even without having access to automation tools like Growth Channel, for example. So really trying to understand, okay, who is my customer? And what's their day in life like what's important for them, what their challenges are. And this will basically guide your strategy further down the road. But this will tell you pretty much, okay, what content I should be focusing on, what channels I should be focusing on, what kind of content ideas I might have actually for my campaigns. So just having that information is, I think, the foundation of everything else that goes kind of from it. So there isn't really one tactic that would work for everyone. So, but this one will do, like the foundation of identifying who you're trying to reach.
So, okay. So I'm getting some new insights in regards to, based on my target, my ideal customer, and I'm getting all these suggestions to start doing, these particular activities. Whether it's creating this type of piece of content or doing some other things. If I start thinking about that, I'm starting to think about the amount of work that actually gets created by doing this type of plan. So if you could kind of give us some perspective of what it would look like typically for somebody to go through that process.
Yeah, I think when you need to go through that process, again, you can speak to your existing customers. It can be even one customer or some prospects. You can talk to them during the discovery call to identify some of those, some of that information. But also, when you think about like what would be the next step, like what would be the first thing that I need to do to bring them down their journey, it really depends also at what stage you're at. Like, okay, do you yet have a website? Like maybe that's important, right? Or basically identifying what's the things in the trigger step of the funnel, like in the very first kind of awareness piece, right? What's important there? Like most probably for them to be able to learn more about like me and my brand and my company, my services, right? So I think having some kind of presence is really important. And then just plotting, okay, maybe I should have a website, maybe I should update my LinkedIn profile. Maybe I should list my company on, I don't know, this directory with agencies that are local in my area or something like that. So it really depends kind of on your business, but these are a few ideas that you can kind of think. This is the thinking process basically that you can take forward. And then once you're done with that, you can move into the next step, like a consideration. Okay, once a person actually maybe Googles, I don't know, best agencies in Cleveland or something like this, or I don't know, best local software for A, B, and C, what are they going to find? And then being able to be there either with search engine optimization or search engine marketing or whatnot, right? All those digital marketing tactics, then you can also identify those opportunities. So this is kind of the process that I would go through.
Okay, so and we're using the agency example, but that would apply to I'm a small software company. I would apply to I have a small consultancy. All of that still is germane. It's really looking at the whole framework and the process that's needed in order to be successful. So give me an example of impact, right? I'm going from yes, I have a plan, I have a strategy, I have a website, which most people do. If they've already been in business, but yet I need to do something even different or better. Like give you an example. There was a coach that I met who's been in business, has their own business for 30 years, right? Creating content, does a podcast, and all with talking about the changes in COVID. Now everybody, not everybody, I shouldn't generalize like that. A lot of people, find themselves for whatever reason, now starting their own, consulting practice. Joining, a consulting practice, and being an overall freelancer. And so you have essentially, just from a sheer numbers perspective, a significantly greater amount of people trying to get attention of other businesses in order to, buy their products and services. And so, how can I take, something that has already been established? Now I'm finding, a whole brand new sea of competition that I've never had before. And have it, to be different and more impactful because I'm not following the patterns that I've been following for the past 30 years. So can you talk to somebody who's in that scenario and, how they would actually be able to come, to having greater success by, using a solution like yours?
Yeah, definitely. So, let's assume that you don't have a niche, because that's something I talked earlier, like a few minutes ago, right? I would definitely suggest going into like a specific area and then scale from there. But let's assume you don't have that for whatever reason. In that case, I would do a deeper competitor analysis and identify what the competitors are doing wrong, what backlinks they lost that were very powerful, like what are the content opportunities that they're missing on, what are the social channels maybe they are not exploring, which are still relevant for your target audience. Like doing that competitive analysis in depth and identifying the opportunities and gaps, that is something that I would start from if you don't have a niche. But ideally you have a niche, but assuming you don't, then I would do like that. And with our tool, you can automate all that competitive analysis, so you don't need to sit in a few months identifying those things.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of places that you just don't even know where to look, right?
Yeah.
And I think, to me, I always, it never surprises me, or at least it shouldn't, how I always find this brand new thing, to me, that's brand new, that has been around for a while and is just massive. And I'm like, how do I just never find this? Because I'm always, doing research and trying to find things online. And I think that, what you need, technology in order to help you sort through all that. There's just no way you can keep up with it all.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like you're talking about technology, like there are so many tools out there today. Like even take the biggest one, which I think all of us know, right? HubSpot. And they have this big agency network within the tool that use their tool themselves, and that also use it for the customers as well. So, I mean, even if you're just starting off, like looking at those opportunities, like a lot of companies want to use HubSpot, but they don't know how, or they don't have resources. Like you can actually, by knowing how to use HubSpot, you already have like a whole bunch of services, if you're an expert on it, that you can also like resell and get extra revenue from, right? And this is like one tool that everyone knows, I think, but there are so many other ones that you can pretty much work in the same way and the same manner. And this is also how you can kind of grow your little consulting freelance work.
So, okay. So I think it's important to tell a little bit more detail about your background, talking about the agency piece. And I mean, how does, somebody like you get into, being, an entrepreneur that creates a software like this?
Yeah, I mean, we have done, so my agency was a full service agency. So we would start from planning those campaigns before we go into the execution. And then after the execution of the campaign, of course, ongoing optimization, reporting and all that. So everyone wants to go into the executional part and activating that campaign because that's the creative piece, like that actually the work starts, right? But the planning usually would take a while, like also going back and forth, right, with the client, happy, not happy, why are we having this KPI benchmark, and why this competitor, or I don't know, so many other questions. So by automating that process and identifying with AI those opportunities that already kind of back up itself, this is why. So this actually also brings the process down much quicker, and then also gives more opportunities for agencies to kind of, and freelancers and consultants and whatnot, digital marketers, to move on to the next step in their journey. Something that we're also working on in our pipeline is also making it easier to kind of optimize the campaigns within our tool. We already started implementing some of the things, but more to come, because I think that's also the area that definitely needs more work. I think the activation part is pretty straightforward nowadays with all the tools out there, but like the planning, the optimization part is definitely a great opportunity there to think about.
Well, and it makes sense because when you try to do some planning and where your options are almost endless, at least from a human computation and evaluation perspective, it is absolutely limitless, right? I think this is where technology, especially AI, can be just a huge benefit if we can set aside our own bias. We talked about that and say, look, a machine can do this better than I can because it's really just analyzing information, right? And it's doing it in a way by which I'm not in the way. Because I've seen, just kind of like you were just explaining, and you did it quite graciously, I might add, where you have this constant analysis and constant back and forth. and constant refuting of, well, why that comparative versus this comparative? Why this, why that? And oftentimes, and I talked to a guy earlier today who was saying how he was working for somebody who was, as he put it, this guy was brilliant. I mean, he was Mensa level IQ. He goes, but we never went anywhere. He goes, every time we got ready to take an action and essentially launch, he would say he found an even better way. He goes, and it finally came to where people just started leaving left and right because they lost confidence that they were actually going to do something because they were constantly in the planning stage. So I have to ask the question, if I start thinking just about that segment of, the entire execution process. And what I mean by execution is that, we plan, we take an action, we iterate, we improve, is, how much improvements have you seen in that particular area just in itself?
Yeah, it depends where the company is at. So some of the earlier stage companies, they can like double their revenue, but the ones who are already like enterprise level companies, they just see maybe a few percent, but which is still a significant improvement, right? So it really depends, like where you're at, what's your budget, what industry you're at. I mean, so many different variables. I think we have like around 50 different variables actually for that. So,
so I would dare to say that when you start looking at business impact, it's quite significant. And you're talking about transformation. You're accelerating the rate of transformation for a lot of organizations. So let's think about this on the other side. As far as, what I was able to accomplish. There's a saying that goes, oftentimes we get very frustrated on what we attempt to or are able to accomplish in a single day. And oftentimes we're amazed by what we can accomplish over a year, right? So if you think about that, that issue that we often contend with, it's like, what did you get done today? I don't know. It seemed like I was just not getting anything accomplished, right? So how much more from an accomplishment perspective can I expect when I start condensing and automating and doing all that? And you might find your own example, but for me, what comes to my mind is like, a campaign perspective. Like before I was really only be able to realistically execute on, 3 campaigns, over a year, or 1 a quarter. What does it look like afterwards?
Yeah. So in terms of execution, kind of depends on your resources and how fast you can move. But in terms of planning, like if your planning process is a month, you can definitely get it down to just 1 week. Actually, you can get it down to 1 week, even if you had a planning process for a few months or 6 months, whatever that is. But let's say if you have 2 people working on the planning part and it takes you maybe a month or 2, that's already like $20,000, right? We are looking at approximately. So you can save that and add it to your campaign activation budget, basically.
That's pretty significant. Okay, so if I was to say, I'm talking about budget, and I have my budget allocated a certain way, where should I potentially be removing some budget and applying it to? Yeah.
Again, that kind of depends on your performance. I would definitely look at the performance per channel and for a specific campaign. So it really kind of depends on the specifics there. But maybe we can take an example. So let's say maybe do you have like an example in mind? Let's look into details because like this out of the open space, it's very hard to say. I mean, I would just look at what's my key objective, like what's my number 1 KPI for this campaign. And then look, okay, which channels are performing well and which campaigns are performing well to achieve that KPI. The ones that have the highest percentage, put more budget there. The ones with the lowest ones, take out. So that's how I would do that. Very simple. I mean, it sounds simple, but of course you need to identify those things across multi-channel campaigns can take some time, right? Yeah, that's basically the formula. Let's put it this way, generally speaking. But if you have like a specific example, we can talk about that too.
I don't. I mean, for me, it's, just trying to, I think this is there's such an opportunity for education and learning in regards to, being more effective, in how we go about our overall planning process. Because a lot of times, like you just, coming back for full circle, a lot of times we just jump in and start doing things. And I'm trying, for me personally, I'm trying to be more intentional on doing the necessary planning and focusing in on the quality component and not so much the quantity component. And that's not easy. It's not easy. So if I start, looking at, what really should a B2B digital marketer be focusing in on, going forward, kind of bringing this back and summarizing everything that we've talked about. What is that one area you really should be focusing on?
Yeah. Well, I would kind of reiterate my answer to the first question you asked there about the customer journey, right? But the thing is that even before the customer journey, you definitely need to understand your market and the person you're trying to target, right? So you need to have this in the background, because if you don't have that, you wouldn't be able to plot your customer journey, right? So what does the funnel look like? Because the funnel is very different, I would say, per each of your customer segments. And it's also very different for different maybe niche markets. And if you want to kind of consider different sets of the competition, because usually we have this competitive map, right? It's like an axis to identify, okay, if I'm right here, who is playing right next to me, right? Who are those closest competitors? So you definitely want to look at them, like what they're doing, what's happening, what's working for them, what doesn't work for them, what are those opportunities for me? So that's going to help you a lot. And then identifying who are those customers, potential customers for me. And in B2B space, we have like decision makers, we have buyers, we have like sometimes like legal IT even involved, right? So like kind of purchasing people. We've got the actual users. And they have very different decision-making process. They all have very different, those customer journeys, I call them. So they all are going to have different stages, and they all look for different content. While the decision maker may be looking for like, okay, what's my ROI on this? If I do this, the user will be like, oh, how much time can I save in a day, or like how much more can I do, or those kind of things. And the IT is going to ask, well, what's the security element, right? Or how we integrate it with our other systems, whatever you're trying to do here. So everyone is looking for different content at different channels. The conversation is going to be very different with every stakeholder right there. So it's very important to understand those dynamics first before you actually plot your funnel. You cannot have one funnel for everyone.
I think that's great. That's a great point. And it's the complexity that we need to make simple. So Maryna, I've had a good time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the B2B DM gang how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Maryna Burushkina. You can also check out growthchannel.io for more information. And I'll also make sure that we have a direct link right there in the description for you as well.
Maryna Burushkina, help me again. Burushkina.
Yeah, that's great.
Maryna Burushkina, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.